All right, I'll get started now. I am Judy Willett. I'm the Senior Project Manager with the Division of Palliative Care and Geriatric Medicine. I am delighted to have you all join us this evening. We are just a few IT things. You are all muted right now, and if you stay muted, that would be helpful so we don't have a lot of background. But we would love your thoughts, suggestions, whatever you have, questions, put them in the chat as we always do, and have been doing for a few years now, so feel free. The other thing is up in the right-hand corner of your computer, you probably know by now, but the view, you can view the speaker or you can view the gallery. And at some point, Monique, who is our fabulous administrative assistant for everybody, will be spotlighting Dr. Altman and myself during Q&A. But before that, feel free to look at everybody and even after that during Q&A. All right. So those are those types of things. The other thing is, many of you know, because you've joined us before, but if you are new, just so you do know, oh, we're getting a fabulous group of people coming. Welcome, everybody. I was just letting everybody know that MGH Division of Palliative Care and Geriatric Medicine launched the Dementia Caregiver Support Program in 2017. We've had the conversations with caregivers from the beginning, and it is our monthly program. Our mission for the Dementia Care Collaborative is to transform memory care. We do research and educational programs, clinical programs, and we exist specifically to educate and support patients, caregivers, clinicians, and really many of our programs are open to the whole community. Again, there are a variety of programs for individuals and families, patients for individuals from specific MGH clinics. These conversations with monthly health and resiliency programs, along with fundamental skills for caregivers, support groups, and now we have 2 different exercise programs that you are all welcome to join. Feel free to just email me or look on the Dementia Care Collaborative and send me a little note. All of that works. We are largely funded through the philanthropic support from individuals and from 3 larger foundations, which is the Berkshire Bank, Bresky Family Foundation, and the Satter Foundation. But all of your donations, small or large, are incredibly helpful to put on all of these educational programs, exercise, etc. So we are delighted that you have joined us on this evening, and it is my pleasure to introduce Abby Altman, who is a PhD and is an associate psychologist and geropsychologist with the Departments of Psychiatry and Neurology at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Her clinical work is focused on older adults and evidence-based psychotherapy, dementia caregiving, and building motivation for brain and lifestyle health behaviors. She is the co-director of the Renew program, which is resilience through neurologic and emotional wellness. She is also an associate professor of psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School. So as you can see, we are thrilled and delighted to have her with us today. And obviously, so are you all, because more and more of you are joining us. We had about 70 people who were going to join this evening. So we are thrilled, and I will pass it on to Dr. Altman.
May I interject? This is Monique.
Yes, Monique.
Someone sent me a message wondering about confidentiality on the Zoom. Could you just make note?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking that. The recording is only for our website, and it does not have any patients, caregivers, community people. It only highlights myself and Dr. Altman. That's number one. And it is confidential in that. But the chat is open to everybody on here. So please don't put any personal medical questions or comments up there. But definitely feel free to ask, what is the best way for me to meditate, or what is the best, whatever questions come to your mind. But don't put any medical information up there. And if you have any other questions, whoever asked for the confidential and I didn't answer it thoroughly, please put it back in and I will reply even more thoroughly. Okay, and we are now in for a treat talking about stress reduction and activities for caregivers, but really activities for all of us. Abby, Dr. Altman, I pass it on to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I had it on gallery view to see everybody's faces, and so excited for the opportunity to learn and speak to all of you, but also to hopefully offer some thoughts and ideas that could help us in our caregiving role, and to help with stress, help understand things that might affect us day to day, and hopefully offer some ideas and strategies to help. So hopefully coming out of this with a little bit more information that can be useful. So what I'm going to do is just start sharing my slides here. So give me 1 second to get it all pretty and on the screen. So as Judy mentioned, here is me, and I could also share a little bit more at the end about my work in the Renew program, which supports individuals with neurological conditions. The groups that I run are focused on caregivers, and those would be groups that anyone here are welcome to attend, you and your community, as well as groups focused on memory support. So for today, in thinking about stress reduction and activities for caregivers, I aimed to be a little more specific to something that comes up a lot in the caregiver groups that I run, which is managing uncertainty. And I think we all know that uncertainty is not just something that we deal with in our roles as caregivers, something very common to our day-to-days. Fortunately, it feels like more common with all the choices and decisions and life stressors that we experience just in life. But thought that for today, we could be thinking together here a bit about how uncertainty affects us, possibly in even more unique ways as caregivers, how we can understand it, hopefully for you all to kind of get a bit of, I experienced that, a group sense that this is something we may all experience together. It's not unique, but also think about what we can do about it, how we could think about it, and how we can best manage something in some ways that we can't change, but we can potentially change how we think about it and react to it. So managing the uncertainty in dementia caregiving. So there's so much uncertainty in dementia and dementia caregiving. When looking at the literature a bit, in thinking about this presentation or times I've lectured on this topic, I was a little surprised that there's not much out there. There's a good amount of data and research on uncertainty in general, but as somebody who works in this field a lot, it really has stood out in examples from patients, from families, that it seems extra hard in terms of what we carry, a lot of the unknowns. I did find one study from not too long ago, and I wanted to just talk about something that stood out for me and looked a little different than other things that we might deal with regards to medical diagnoses and medical conditions. So a study looked at the transition from pre-diagnosis, so not yet having a diagnosis of dementia, to a diagnosis of dementia and what that looks like. And as many of you know in your own journeys and what you've experienced, there's sort of this first stage of becoming aware. Let's say something is maybe not quite right, something is different in my loved one. You're talking to medical providers, you're talking to your community. Eventually, you might be referred to a clinic and get an appointment to see a doctor to talk more about what's going on, potentially a neurologist, potentially a neuropsychologist. And then there's tests. Your loved one goes through neuropsychological testing to understand, did something change, what's going on, maybe biomarker testing to see actually, is there evidence of something like a dementia? And then the diagnosis. Once we get to the diagnosis, we are kind of in this next stage of navigating the new normal, the everyday expectations. And as you see here, something they highlighted, and I just took this image from the study, that uncertainty increases in this process for most individuals going through this, more specifically dementia caregivers and the families involved, which in thinking about this, it really resonated with the experiences I have clinically and with the patients I work with, that you are in this quest for the diagnosis, you finally get it, but kind of the opposite occurs in comparison to maybe other medical conditions or diagnoses. It's come up before in my work that some individuals might have also had a journey with, let's say, cancer or some other pretty life-changing medical diagnosis. That with that, the experience is the other direction, that it actually was sort of a relief. Uncertainty was decreased once we got diagnosis because there was a set plan, a set treatment. I mean, after a little bit of time, but uncertainty didn't go up generally. And so that's sort of a big part of why I wanted to talk about this here today. We're all managing a lot of stress and a lot of things due to being caregivers and what this means, but also to put out there as sort of this group understanding and agreement that uncertainty is loaded in this management of dementia. And with things going up, I think that extra TLC to give ourselves about what is happening, how can we understand what's going on in our bodies, and what are some things we could do to help if possible. So uncertainty kind of feels at times like your brain is doing a big explosion. And what I'm going to ask here is if you felt comfortable with the chat feature. And one thing I just did want to add to the confidentiality piece, my understanding is with recordings, you won't see your name pop up. And please correct me if I'm wrong on a chat. So if there was something you were contributing, your name will be there on our chat, but that would not be in the recording. It doesn't live after. So what I'm going to put out here are some things that I've heard from my patients through the years about the uncertainty they manage, meaning the questions they ask and the things they're sort of thinking about a lot in their process of caregiving. And what I'd say to you, if you wanted just to help here and bring us all together in the chat, feel free starting now, if you'd like, to put in some of the uncertainties you deal with in this process. What are some things you think about? But here are some examples. Am I making the right choice? I hear this a lot. And I'd say this is extra complicated. Of course, in this process, what I think about is you're likely now making choices for someone you never needed to before. There was probably a joint decision-making process with a loved one. Now, things might not feel as joint, possibly due to the impact of dementia, the impact on insight and awareness in our loved ones. On top of this, the ambiguous loss. I think there was once a lecture by Pauline Boss, a wonderful, wonderful researcher and lecturer on this topic, which is we're shifting to this extra pressure, which wasn't on us before, and how much extra layer of questioning that brings to us in the day-to-day about next steps and planning. So this level of uncertainty happens a lot, I think, for caregivers. How will others react? We live in a very interpersonal world, right? Every day, people are involved in our lives, for better or for worse. And for this, your loved one might not have, let's say, noticeable signs yet, at least not to the world, but yet you're navigating the what happens, what does somebody say, uncertainty related to that, how will others react, will they be kind? Will they point out those differences and those struggles? What do I do? So kind of our mind spinning in terms of that. will this last? I'm going to go to the chat to the examples in a moment. Will this last? And this comes up a lot in two distinct ways. One is if there's a great strength that your loved one still has, and most likely still has many, that question, when will it go away? Uncertainty related to how long will I get to hold on to those memories? On the flip, what if an unwanted behavior is occurring, which definitely can happen, more irritability, agitation. You are experts on what you experience day to day. So that question of when will this end? I could only carry so much. So uncertainty related to that. How will I manage it all? How will I know it's time for the next step? Memory care, adult day program, a lot of those questions. I'm just going to turn to the chat to give a voice now to what others are saying. How quickly will decline happen? Exactly. So much uncertainty there. And I think that speaks to that medical piece that we're almost assured. I'm going to say assured, but we know timelines a little bit more. Likely we'll get this test, treatment will last this long. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury in dementia in many ways. We're getting closer to some things, but not that luxury, unfortunately. When should I take over financial management? For sure, the planning. Our brains can just explode with all this. And I will talk a little bit about like the adaptiveness of this. We're planners. Of course, we want these answers, but it's hard to get these answers. What will happen in the future? Can I leave him alone? Safety, so much uncertainty. New medications. Yes, thank you, Judy, for your insights there too. What if? Like, what if he or she falls? If a safety thing happens? So the screen for some reason when you move away, it doesn't let you. All right, just troubleshooting my weird. There we go. My apologies. Is it safe? Medications are new, exciting, potentially for many of us, but newness. What does it mean to qualify, not qualify? Is it safe or not? You know, so I imagine a lot of these questions really resonate and bring us uncertainty. Can I trust the doctors I'm working with, the home health aides, the facility, the nonstop spinning that could occur, unfortunately, with this, because there is a lot to keep in mind, a lot of planning to consider. What to expect each time, right? Preparing them for the uncertainty. How much do we share with our loved one impacted? How much do we not? Can we go to little fiblets because sometimes you need to just maintain your sanity? Is that kind? Is that respectful? So much questioning. I mean, we're human and the wonderful brains we all have, but also it could definitely help us spin a lot of these questionable pieces. All right, so I'm going to turn away from the chat. Thank you for all the contributions. So what I hope to do and just speak about for a moment here is kind of the awesomeness of our brain. And this won't be so focused on the dementia piece, meaning somebody with dementia and the impact on the brain, but speaking about us in general as humans, the human species, and thinking about the adaptiveness of our brain and some of the awesome things it does. I think I hit the lottery with this picture. I really smiled. I apologize for any copyright infringement here. I didn't mean to, but I just thought it was really appropriate since in putting together this slide, I was thinking our brain likes to predict. And it's a wonderful, wonderful trait. It is always thinking. We don't just hear, we're trying to predict what we're going to hear next. We don't just see, we're trying to predict what we see next. Why does this happen? Why does our brain do this? Our brain, as many of you know, because you have good ones, it likes to think, plan ahead, map out, not usually just for the moment, but for the long term. And there's things, literature out there that would support. I'm no expert on animal species and things that we as humans, potentially maybe dolphins and elephants, we're kind of one of the only animal species that does do this with as much sophistication. And why? Our brain as a prediction machine is something that has really led to our survival, meaning if you understand the next step, what's going to happen, we can predict safety, we stay alive. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about this on the next slide, but our brain likely has kept our species going. And that's great, though there are some shortcomings with it that we hit with aspects of uncertainty. And I hope to talk about that on the next slides, but did want to just give some data a little bit, some information about why this all is happening and what makes uncertainty maybe a little bit more uncomfortable for all of us. So now if we could expand this to the brain and uncertainty for a moment. What do we do when our brain cannot predict? As we know, our brain wants to predict, our brain wants the answers. We also know, I think intellectually, that knowing everything is kind of impossible and also takes some pleasure out of life. Like, who would want their holiday gift list ahead of time? I mean, I guess some do. We like surprises, but some areas we just don't want it. And often that hits in the areas of safety, protection, wellness, especially for those we love. And here we are, though, kind of with this question of what happens, and I'd like to think for a minute, what happens when our brain meets uncertainty, when we can't predict what's happening next? And on that last slide, when we had that brain and all those thoughts, you know, some of those uncertainty thoughts, what it creates for us are some thoughts of, I can't handle it. I don't have a good plan. You may have a plan, but that question, do I have the right plan? Do I have a good plan? It might also lead to thinking of, this will be ongoing, distress won't end, it will be continuous. And some of your situations with uncertainty, if you're experiencing it, might not go to this more intense place, but imagine it likely has, because again, our brain wants to predict, and there may be thoughts of danger, let's say, if we don't have those solutions and answers. So one thing that our brain doesn't also, I want to say it does a really good job at, but also gets a little bit stuck on, is discerning the difference between what is uncertain and what is dangerous. And another real amazing thing, and I think as becoming a psychologist, one thing that really hooked me was learning about the fight or flight response. And so I'm just going to spend a little bit, many of you know about this, to talk about this because it fits with uncertainty really, really well. That when we feel we're in danger, like for sure the tiger there, we think back to caveman or years ago when survival really was having to plan all the time to make sure some species didn't grab us or take us to get, and ultimately we wanted to survive and get food. Certain things would happen in our body to keep us well. One thing would be our heart would race if that tiger or that animal came at us. And that helped us actually run away, let's say, or hide or freeze to keep ourselves safe. And that makes sense. If a tiger is coming at you, your heart's going to race. Of course, in that moment, we're not sort of as aware that our heart is racing because it's pumping blood to our arms and legs to help us run or, you know, do something to protect ourselves. The other real cool one that I always love to talk about is the sweat response that happens in these situations, often to probably get ourselves more lubricated or slippery so these animals don't grab onto us. And we know this as a stress response. You get anxious, you get overwhelmed, your body acts in this way. And it's uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good. Although at the end of the day, just like our brain, it's there to protect us. Kind of this programmatic thing that has been around for all the time we've been here. But it gets complicated because sometimes our brain does not understand the difference based on how we think about uncertainty between the tiger and some thoughts we're having, like those ones around that brain that we looked at earlier. If we're thinking about the future in ways where we're really overwhelmed or concerned or thinking we're not going to do it right, we're going to activate fight or flight, which again, normal, but a tiger or a lion isn't there. So our brain gets pretty confused. So what I was going to do now is just shift a little to talking about what those sensations might look like, just to put it out there. And then I'm actually going to open it up to a chat again to see what maybe your stress responses look like. maybe to uncertainty, just to sort of see and poll the group a little. So these are some examples. And so if you felt comfortable in the chat, this is not a comprehensive list, just one I put together of how your body might feel. So I know we're talking here about stress management, and I think, informative at least to say this is why it happens for many of us, potentially exacerbated. I mean, stress is there no matter what, but we might feel extra in some of these categories because of the way we're uncertain, because of the uncertainty we're experiencing, which unfortunately a lot of it we can't control, but also because we're thinking about things in very risky sort of this is not good kind of ways. So, and I'll turn to the chat for a minute, but if anyone felt comfortable, if you had any ways of feeling stress, experiencing it in your body, ways you thought stressfully, experienced it behaviorally, feel free to stick it in the chat too. So emotionally, you might have those feelings of fear. If we're facing uncertainty, you might have anger, nervousness, irritability, sadness, loneliness, hopelessness, moodiness, worry. Again, not here to pathologize. It makes sense, right? You're thinking those thoughts. You're going to have big, strong emotions, understandably. Cognitives, the way we think, we might think over and over again, did I do something wrong? What's going to happen? What will decline look like? Will there be side effects? Overwhelm potentially due to that indecisiveness. Gosh, it's hard to make a decision when there's so many choices. Impaired focus, impaired memory for ourselves as well, doubting ourselves. It's really hard to do this alone, and many of us are experiencing this more alone than they ever have before. This is a big task. Going to the next category, and then, I'll move along here. Physically, I think this is what we usually know with more stress, anxiety, worry, feeling sick, that GI stuff. This is like the more traditional fight or flight. Like a lot of this is happening because it's preparing you to fight that tiger, not so much uncertainty. And behaviorally, losing sleep, we've all been there, eating more, eating less, nervous habits, excessive maybe engagement and things that would be in the less healthy category, avoiding, easier sometimes not to make a decision, or the opposite, trying to make the best decision or thinking there is a right decision. So just quickly, just looking at the chat here, the spiral of sleep disturbance. Yes, sleep is a big one. The way we relate to our sleep, there's so many factors with sleep. So thank you for pointing that out, kind of all chicken and the egg. But of course, uncertainty or the way we think about our roles, a lot of the inherent, unfortunately, exacerbated aspects of uncertainty in caregiving definitely ups that. And thanks, a comment of helping to understand a family member with this diagram. Thanks. Yes, uncertain. Yeah, uncertain, fear, everything. There's a couple. Yeah, questioning over and over again, which I know for me, that's what I do in my stress response for sure. Just that like doubt. Maybe if I think about it again, I'll get a different answer. So we all experience a lot. All right, I'm just gonna now move ahead to, I don't know why this does this. It likes to pause when I go to the screen. Oh, sorry. Let me redo that. Oh, my apologies.
No problem at all. We're all with you.
Think sometimes when you share, it has its own ideas.
No problem.
So this is a little bit of a review, but did want, like, if you in some way do the Webster Dictionary view of stress, it does speak a lot about an imbalance between perceived demands. So what we're thinking, like, what are the demands of the situation, as well as do I think I can handle it? And I thought that was extra relevant to some of our discussions here, that obviously we have the situation of caregiving, uncertainty about prognosis, timelines, medications, all the things, even maybe what type of dementia, like what does it mean in terms of insight, decline, safety? Gosh, so many questions. And then this piece, which I think probably is standing out a little bit more in our talk so far, of the appraisal. Where does my mind go? And this might vary across all the situations you're handed, of I can manage it, to oh no, to, oh, this could be dangerous. Like if I give him the wrong med, him or her the wrong med, we do the wrong thing, bad stuff's going to happen. So we can understand what that could do to us in the day-to-day. And then that, the thought really of, can I handle this? Do I have supports? Am I good enough? Meaning, do I, you know, is my oxygen mask on? How do I handle it? What does that look like? And why I say some of it is subjective, because a lot of it is influenced by what we're dealing with, how we're thinking about it, how we're viewing our ability to manage uncertainty. So now I'm going to switch to thinking about, I want to say like skills, like this, knowing that this is potentially fact in some aspects of this, we can't change, meaning I wish, and I think we all wish for each other here on the call in terms of compassion and kindness, that this didn't have to be this way. Also that our loved ones didn't have this diagnosis in the first place. Let's just put that out there, that we want that certainty for sure. But there are a lot of things here that we won't get answers to, and how triggering that could be alone. But to also kind of explore, when we're going through this, when all those questions come to mind, can we kind of call it out as uncertainty? Can that be useful? Or to ask ourselves, maybe, did that tiger come out? Am I looking at this like a real risky, fear-based situation? To ask ourselves that a little bit, almost to empower ourselves with some of that wording, to say, maybe it is this uncertainty that is unfortunately linked to this type of caregiving, like that study showed, and also amplified as we go along, unfortunately. Or is something really dangerous? Sometimes it might be. I don't want to say you're not dealing with a dangerous situation, but maybe not in that same way our brain is trying to think about it and predict it. And to also ask ourselves, can I do anything about this right now? I imagine many of you are problem solvers, and get things done. Sometimes though, we really can't solve something if it hasn't happened yet. And we can't solve something that we don't have the information on, because there is no information on. And that's a tough place to be, but at least acknowledging that we're trying to do it or getting stuck there can be useful. And then lastly, is it solvable right now? Similar to the initial point. Are there solvable pieces, or is my mind kind of making it harder for me in this situation, because it really wants what it does so well, which is predictability. And it wants that next step to help me survive, help my loved ones survive. But how is it fitting into this picture? So one thing, I work in cognitive behavioral therapy, and so I think a lot about tables and tracking, and just one thing, and then I'm going to switch to some other ideas and thoughts for a minute. That it can be useful to sort of pause, maybe even journal or track. You know, of course, what's useful for you and what fits in your day-to-day, but asking ourselves some of this. So potentially with the example of, I made the wrong decision, that for sure came up in the chat a couple times. What am I worried about? That I made the wrong decision. Asking ourselves, is it uncertainty or is it fear? Is there danger? Possibly, in this case, more uncertainty that we made the wrong decision, because the unknown, it's doubt. Are there steps that I can take? Potentially, we could stick with the decision we made, or at least say I made a decision, because you likely made the best decision you could with the information you had. And also acknowledging and giving yourself some self-compassion that you're likely doing this more on your own than you ever have before. Is it solvable right now? Not really, meaning we can't say for sure that of what's going to happen with the decision. That's a tough one. But letting ourselves know, and this came up in the chat, and again, I could relate to this, that the overthinking might complexify this a little bit more and make it harder. Clearly easier said than done, but something just to keep in mind when we're in these situations. And here are just some other thoughts and ideas. So considering what can remain certain within the uncertainty. So in a moment here, I'm actually going to ask also if anyone felt comfortable to share in the chat how you might relate to this, because this is an interesting one where clearly there's a lot that's uncertain. but there's likely certain things that are still certain in your day-to-day, or at least closer to certain, more reliable. So a couple of examples, and then we could, feel free if you already have some thought that you'd like to contribute. We'd love to hear some ways you're thinking about this. I imagine that for many of you, what's certain is your love for who you care about, your love for your person, that no matter what's going to happen, even with the ups and downs and some of those major changes, that you love them. There's tough days ahead and tough days currently, but you love them. Also, likely your perseverance, clearly from just coming to groups like this and being participants in a community, that desire for support, for skills, for a community, and how that could be certain that you will try to learn or connect. Another way I try to apply this is the use of the and skill that many of you probably know and have tried, which is putting out both sides to this as much as possible, that we're acknowledging that the situation is complicated, that there's uncertainty along the way, and that certainty, I'm trying to do the best I can. I mean, I think most of us, even though the outcome is still uncertainty, you all are trying. And I think being able to put some equal focus there too can help buffer this to some degree. Another example, and feel free if there's some ways you help by having something certain, I'd love to hear it in the chat or put something in there that might make sense. Other things that are certain, if possible, could be, and these are broad, very broad, but routines, what keeps you well, whether it's waking up at a certain time, going to bed at a certain time, drinking this much water, eating certain foods, not eating certain foods, kind of that homeostatic balance that only you know in terms of what keeps you well and keeps you certain. Nutrition kind of included that in that. Exercise for some, that offers that certainty, right? Or at least the certainty that you're taking care of your health. Because again, for caregivers, and I'm sure there's been topics about this, it is very hard to take care of ourselves when taking care of somebody else. On top of that, all the uncertainty. And so thinking about self-care as well. And hopefully some of these techniques or things and considering how to apply it can be considered also as aspects of, let's say, self-care. I don't think there was anything in the chat. Yeah, okay. So this is another, again, these are just thoughts and ideas. And I also wanted to kind of just explain also certainty and the uncertain, or what we can offer ourselves, because when our brain wants predictability, these are ways to give it a little more predictability and help that ending that the brain sort of craves and deserves. So being present, many of you have probably dabbled with mindfulness or even diaphragmatic or deep breathing, being aware also of our posture. I'm famous for my lean forward here, but sometimes when you're doing that, you realize you're kind of like not, I don't know, not feeling your best either. So being aware of your body in space. Another thing to keep in mind that I find useful to offer certainty, again, to give your brain that medicine it needs, especially when you're not getting it elsewhere, is to think about your 5 senses. I'd say nothing is more free than tapping into your 5 senses. Hopefully some of you might struggle with some a little bit more, but the others hopefully are still there and strong, or even stronger if you're having difficulty in one of your sense areas. But being able to turn to that when possible, when dealing with uncertainty, or just throughout the day, if it made sense. One technique some of you may have heard about, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So what this offers could be sort of in the moment, but also a reflection throughout the day or when we're overwhelmed or feeling uncertain. A way to sort of ground us to what is certain in our body and our environment. So what you might do with this technique is you would look around and point out or notice 5 things you see. So what I'm going to maybe ask you to do is even just kind of look at your environment here for a minute. What are 5 things, or just anything that you notice? And right now, I notice my window, I notice my ceiling, I notice the lights glaring, that's for sure. So that's what you would do. And also you could flip-flop the senses, whichever kind of direction makes sense for you. What you feel, so potentially your feet on the floor, your back on the chair, maybe the air in the room on your skin, things like that. So what you feel holding a pen if you're writing something down, touching the computer keys. What you hear, it gets a little harder as you progress. What you hear, sounds around you, clearly the noise outside, noise of heaters, my voice, what we smell, what we taste. And in the moment, choosing some of these, you can do 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. It doesn't have to be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, but acknowledging certain things that are certain in the uncertainty. This is also, I think, a very unique phenomenon that has been more recently studied in our understanding of uncertainty, which is generally when we're thinking uncertain thoughts, we stay in the worst case what if place. And we don't generally finish the story. This is not an example related to dementia caregiving, but I'm sure we've all been there before. On a plane, turbulence is shaking, and we're not usually thinking, yes, the plane will land and I will be all happy and everything will be good. We're in that distress. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And I think similarly to things that we're experiencing with dementia, potentially in some of the uncertain moments, that there's a lot going on with what is unknown. But what we want to try to do as much as possible is finish the story. Obviously, you could finish it in a negative way, but I'd say maybe try to finish it in a positive way, because again, with uncertainty, we just don't know. And the positive is just as equally probable as the negative, or if anything, more probable. So if you're worried, let's say the example we gave earlier about an interpersonal situation, I think there was some in the chat, how will they come across? What will they say? What do I do? Do I need to watch them? Can they be okay? Instead of kind of being more in the what ifs, to saying, I'm going to go, I'm going to get through it. There'll be highs, there'll be lows. It'll be over. We'll come home and I'll be glad I went, because I socialized with friends and got out. It doesn't have to, I mean, clearly everyone has their own situations, but letting it end. And often we don't do that in uncertainty, and we stay in that more stress space. And lastly, the kind of a big, I guess a reason I put this bullet here is to just bring some of the slides, like to think about some of the slides I talked about earlier of our reactions to uncertainty are happening for a reason. And so when we're feeling all that discomfort, many of you might not relate to this as fully as I'm saying on that more extreme level, but I think we've all kind of dabbled in that engagement with uncertainty and what it feels like. That again, it is happening because our brains are having normal reactions to just wanting that assurance that everything is going to be okay. Just like our loved ones, we also have needs for security and control and predictability, and that's happening. So being able to say in those moments, it's just my brain wanting certainty. It's doing what it's doing because it cares about me, and it's pretty sophisticated. The flip of this, and sometimes what we see in our loved ones with their rumination or their anxiety, it's exacerbated likely because of this process as well. I know we're not talking so much about that, but sometimes that unrest or the things that we also are experiencing, we might see in our loved ones because they're managing uncertainty. Unfortunately, their insight is likely impaired and not able to understand what's happening in their body as much as we probably understand it right now. I'm going to skip this. So one thing I would say, if anybody is interested in meditation or mindfulness, many of you probably have heard of Kristen Neff. That was just the slide. There is I could pass on recordings, but Kristen Neff is somebody who talks a lot about mindfulness and more specifically self-compassion. And she does have some really neat compassion pause work for caregivers. So that might be something that can help expand on managing, and she does target uncertainty as well. So where I wanted to end was, I know many of you are very well connected with things, and probably the last thing you want to do is sign up for something else. My work is at Brigham and Women's. We definitely have very close associations here with the Dementia Care Collaborative. We run group programming. I'm the co-director of Renew, as Judy mentioned earlier. We have groups that support those with dementia or executive functioning struggles or general neurological conditions, memory skills groups, support groups, goal setting groups, mindfulness groups, groups that help with sleep, and then also the Dementia Caregiving Wellness Series, which I run. If you wanted to sign up, we're going to pass on the link after. I think Monique's going to pass that out once this is sometime after this presentation, I believe. This is a website to get some more information about the groups we offer, and also you could have your provider refer through the wonderful system of MGH if you're connected, or just email us with that link to get set up with a group. Well, that's it for my presentation here today.
All right, thank you so much. There were a lot of real pearls in that, in terms of understanding how we can manage our stress as caregivers and people living with dementia and people who are, looking at challenges and looking for solutions in other ways in their lives. So this is the time. We just have good 15 minutes, half hour, to just ask any questions of Dr. Altman, and also talk about what is bothering you, what's on your mind. Just put it in the chat, and we'll give you just a minute to think it through and see if these ways of de-stressing make sense to you. So take your time. We'll wait in the uncertainty for a few minutes. How's that? Monique put some of the websites and wrote Kristen Neff's name so that you can get some more information. She put it in the chat. Thank you, Monique. Please tell us again the name of the person that does mindfulness and meditation. You want to tell us a little more about Kristen Neff?
Kristen Neff. So,
what kinds of things does she write on, or are they more podcasts, or what are we looking for?
She may at this point have a podcast. I feel like a lot of people go into that territory. Right now, at least what I'm aware of, she has books written on this, as well as a website. If you go to Kristen Neff, it's KristenNeff.com. I could, if there's a pause, I'll put the exact website up. And she has a lot of compassion. So it's mindfulness, and one part of mindfulness is self-compassion, and thinking that that's especially relevant for managing kind of these extra elements of uncertainty and caregiving, as well as just kindness to us as we're dealing with all of this. And she also has specific recordings, if you like to listen, for caregivers. So I'll find that website and put that up too.
That would be great. This is more of a question about self-care and self-compassion. My best never seems to be enough in my mind. I always think that I'm not doing enough. What more can I do? How can you quiet those voices?
Well, I think that speaks so much to what we were talking about here today, to acknowledge that not to say this is so simple to do, but your brain wants to know that you're doing the right thing and wants that certainty. And it's tough because no one could say you're absolutely doing the right thing or that the outcome is going to be perfect. But I think what I'm hearing in your question here is, what more can you do potentially is to say, is it my mind just kind of playing tricks on me a little bit because it wants me to not believe it, or it wants certainty? The flip of it is maybe thinking about what is certain. What are you still doing? How are you showing love, compassion, effort for your loved one? I imagine there's probably a lot more that we are doing that unfortunately is getting shadowed by that overwhelm that occurs from that doubt. So although I can't take those thoughts away from you, to say that possibly they are exacerbated or heightened because we want to predict and know for sure that we're doing the right thing. So that would just be my thoughts on that.
That's great. So when you talk about self-care, it's very hard when I'm a caregiver and I'm in that stress in those times, as we all are now or have been or will be, to take care of ourselves. So the mind, you can take care of yourself, you were just saying, by just really focusing more on what you have done, how much you love, and hopefully quieting the negative. Are there other things that physically we can do? We went through that list, but just highlighting.
Yeah, I think highlighting that a lot of times, I think, not to say it becomes that flipping record in our mind, but without kind of the medicine in some ways of reassuring our brain that we might not get some certainty, but we can get certainty elsewhere. So offering yourself as much opportunity for certainty in other areas of your life, whether it is a practice with taking breaths or nurturing, making sure you have a good meal. Everyone here probably has ideas for yourself of what self-care looks like, because that could be a million different things. Some things that take time, some things that don't. But I'd say here, what we're talking about more, at least in this type of presentation, is when we're having those thoughts, to recognize that maybe it's your brain saying it needs some more certainty in other areas of your life, certainty of being able to have things finished. So the one thing actually I meant to say earlier, another thing really great about routines, it has a start and an end. And letting ourselves know that there are things in our lives that end, good and bad. And with uncertainty, as we've talked about here, there is that thought or fear it won't end. And so reminding ourselves in some of these situations that, is it that we're not doing enough, or we haven't given ourselves some more opportunities to have successes and endings? So if there are habits or developed of practices where things start and end, and hopefully are things that you enjoy, that could be useful to think about.
If people want to, feel free to put 1 word, 2 words, 3 words in terms of what routines are things that would be, that you do or could do that would be self-care for yourself. Some people say exercise, but I have to say that that's one that I struggle with. So that's probably not the best one for me.
Yeah.
Let's see. Abby, what are some of your personal strategies for de-stressing?
Yeah, and I think for me, meditation, mindfulness, connecting, thanks, I was just about to say this, so social connection, knowing it gets tricky because you can't get, I don't want to go into certainty, like you can't get certainty that every social interaction is going to be positive, people are complicated, but doing what I can in the direction of things that are important to me. And I'd say probably my top list would be socialization, some type of educational curiosity, like going to a museum or online tours of museums, intellectual curiosity. But I
could just sometimes take Right, sometimes just taking your mind off it also.
Distraction can be useful. But I think speaking of that idea of knowing, and even like when you're approaching an activity, saying, I'm going to start it and I'm going to end it, because I think we also have like Netflix syndrome, many of us, which is like this ongoing watch and unending of episodes. And like it's almost sometimes just uncomfortable when things end because we're so used to being in these cycles. But I think we all know what it's like to finally have the end results and how good that feels at times. And I think we also recognize that with dementia caregiving and our roles there and our loved ones, we're not getting that. What is the end result, right? Probably not actually something we really want to be thinking about too. So a lot of
Right.
uncertainty. Yeah. So giving
People have
ourselves a break.
shared brisk walks, noting the beautiful things around me,
Perfect.
getting outside when I can. Let's see, before bed, I take a few minutes to look at the sky. It helps me to
Yes.
center.
I think all great examples of things that are certain. What's to walk, to see the sky. The sky will always be there, at least we hope.
Yeah. This one, I have been taking courses towards my MA in biblical counseling through the seminary. And however, it is a bit too much for me. I feel my LO, my energy, my LO is neglected while I do the homework.
Loved one.
Oh, loved one. Thank you. Of course. My loved one is neglected while I do the homework.
Yeah. It's tough because then we go back to, I hate to say, like the uncertainty. Was it worth it? Did I make the right choice? So when I hear that, it's to say clearly learning is important for this participant. Sometimes though, when we go through the process, we learn that maybe it's not the best fit, but still to acknowledge that direction towards getting certainty and routines.
At some point when my husband was very sick, I was trying to continue to do many things also, because as he would look at me and say, what, are you going to just sit here and look at me? So I took Spanish, and I agree. That was way too much for my brain to, with all of everything else that I had going on. So I can relate to that comment. Definitely. Another comment in there, Abby?
Yeah, I see. And one thing, there was just one comment directly to me to say also, if anybody wanted to raise their hands to just share. I know sometimes it's not ideal to do it in chat, but feel free to also raise your hands if there's something you also wanted to contribute to the group.
Caregiving involves many years of grieving. We grieve the loss of a loved one with dementia for many years, long before the person dies. Can you talk about how to manage a very prolonged grieving process and anticipating the dementia patient's parents' death for many years? My husband's mom had early onset dementia and lived for 20 years with dementia before passing away. My dad now has had it for 5 years. That ambiguous loss.
Definitely, and that's what I thought about, that, you know, there is this, not to quote, Pauline Boss in her work, so relevant, that this ongoing process and the slow loss of abilities is so unique to this, hard to discuss. It changes so much of our roles. And I think in speaking to what this individual is saying, the loss of an intellectual partner, an emotional partner, how that changes over time, our expectations, how to set them up for success, how to also accept. Not to say there's so much answers, but I think when I think about this prolonged grieving process, just to state what you're saying, that it definitely goes in these waves where I want to say some days are easier, but some days our loved one and certain things shine through and it makes it easier and might bring some maybe more routine or highs to our days, versus some of the other days where all we're seeing is that loss and understandably the impact on ourselves. And we all know that dementia, it's a family disease, and how it affects everybody here. And I'd say just that prolonged grieving process. I mean, what comes to mind, I think for this individual, there was a lot of people. So just recognizing that, you know, throughout this, are there these moments where you can still connect in some way? I think when I lead, in some of the groups I lead, this idea of, can we still find ways to still see them, or have moments that have me connect to them in an interpersonal way. It could be, you know, at some point, just exchanging a smile or holding a hand, and not to say that's at all equivalent to what type of maybe connection was there initially, but with some of it, it is, and I think hearing shifting some of those expectations of what connection is. It might not have to be a full conversation, but some type of connection physically, with a word, with a song. So in thinking about the anticipation of what might happen, being aware that the way you connect over time might change and look a bit different.
Absolutely. And this participant shared, feel like I continuously teeter between living life to the fullest during husband's early stage dementia and worrying about when the other shoe will drop. Balancing those two is so challenging. How do you hold both things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what this is about. There is the both going on. And I think acknowledging that maybe when you're thinking more about what will happen, and we're not saying don't think that. I hope in my presentation it was never don't think about the thoughts, but recognizing that if we're landing there a lot more and thinking more worst case, or that I'm doing something wrong with a lot of doubt, we'd likely get more into that fight or flight panic mode when we might not, I wouldn't say need to, in that more extreme way, and being able to manage and bring in some of those things to provide us, maybe like what this individual is saying, more of what I can do more in the moment. But yeah, I think that is exactly what dementia is about, dealing with this uncertainty and the back and forth. And of course, when you have a good day, hoping it lasts longer and doesn't go away, and the flip-flop of the opposite. So much of that. So I imagine we all can relate to that, and hopefully this presentation in some ways was helpful in just articulating that as a group understanding that this is a very common experience for those in the role.
Finishing
the
yes, definitely know that you're not alone.
Yeah,
absolutely. Finishing the story and envisioning the best outcome. That does that kind of just shift your brain so that you don't perseverate on what might happen as much?
Yeah. I think in the research that looked, it's really hard to study worry, by the way. But a lot of it was from interviews and understanding overlaps and what people do think about. And that was just the big things that stand out in a lot of the literature, that it's in the worst case for an extra long time. So why it, in terms of the flip, how it's beneficial, I mean, if anything, just that we're not activating as much ongoingly that kind of fear-based responding that our brain is programmed to actually try to want to resolve, but we can't resolve it. So yeah, finishing it with the best hope, and because it's where we want to be. And if we don't know what's going to happen, it's okay to stay a little bit more positive. Know that your brain is still going to try to create that plan and do what it can. And trusting also, I guess sometimes what I say to my caregivers is, probably if you do 10% of your planning or 20%, it's probably still enough. And some interesting science has been shown too, that, I mean, I know the planning, we spend a lot of time in planning, but sometimes when we are just there present with our partner, they've done some studies to show kind of the being just next to someone, holding someone's hand, or just being in somebody's physical space creates that calming presence and the I guess it decreases stress in the individual with dementia. So I know a lot of times it's like what to do, how to create the best life, what to do to create socialization or keep them busy, when sometimes just being there and being present is all that their brain needs, meaning to keep it, let's say, calmer and more neutral. So it's hard. I think like ultimately with this, there's so much to sort of think about and plan, but sometimes even turning it down a little will get us that same outcome. So why not sort of let ourselves end more in the positive or the positive prediction?
Interesting. Yes. How about siblings? So if a family is caring for their mom or their dad who has dementia,
Yeah.
and there's stress or different choices between the family, any suggestions in terms of taking care of yourself when that kind of battling is going on?
Sure. I mean, the last one that really, it's, if I can say maybe a solution, another way of managing uncertainty is saying, I could also trust. I could trust my providers and trust kind of that. I want to say like our mind is doubting, but we could also choose to trust somebody else. And that does end the story and does lead us to a conclusion. I think with a lot of this is all choice. We could choose to doubt ourselves, or we could choose to trust ourselves or trust others. And so that really stood out to me. At some point in my talk, to think about choice related to where you live or where somebody resides. And I think what really stood out in that comment as well for me is, maybe I'm just want to say whether I heard it exactly this way or not, there was also a thinking of what kind of community do I want to be involved in? I mean, of course, for your loved one, but thinking a bit about myself as a caregiver. I like these people. This place is nice. And knowing that you will be there or be there a lot was important for you to have your own community. So trusting that about yourselves. I think if then you went and you doubted this and that, we could see where uncertainty came in. But I think for you, just knowing and getting that encouragement from others was pretty monumental. But I think we often look through that lens of what my loved one needs and not maybe as much of what you need. But I hear that in your suggestion. So I hear trusting your providers, and I guess being open to suggestions from others, as well as this other piece of social support can be pretty great.
And very, very important.
Yeah.
For yourself and for your loved ones and for your family. Prior to that, I was asking about family relationships and when that brings you stress. Any thoughts on how to do self-care in the middle of?
So one, I'm not. I in my caregiver group, we used to have or allow, let's say, more than one family member join at the same time, but we actually stopped that because of conflicts across families, because sometimes we'd have these caregiver groups where it became this focus on families arguing and having different opinions. And why that just came to mind is because it is just really common that we're going to have very different thoughts and opinions. So if anyone has joined my group, I see Linda raising your hand, you know that I say one family member at a time, because it brings this extra piece of uncertainty, this doubt of yourself. I initially like, what will other people say? I just speak about in life, whether it's in dementia caregiving or not. You as humans, you all know that interpersonal uncertainty is real. We can't predict what other people are going to think, what they're going to say. We're going to try our hardest, even if they're our family members, sometimes mind blown of what you're going to hear and different thoughts. I wish I also had the answer for that, but acknowledging that that is an aspect here of uncertainty. And at the end of the day, if we're thinking about what's certain, we could focus on the certainty of what's important to us, what we want to articulate to our loved ones, boundaries that we want to set, things that we want to be clear in terms of our preferences for our loved ones in their life and in their future. Unfortunately, what we can't control is their thoughts and their opinions. So I hate to say it goes back to the uncertainty, but being able to sort of say, if I can't change what they're thinking, or we can't come together, Are there ways to get mediators? Are there ways to have an outside entity help us with decisions, or just in some way think about what I could still do to take care of myself with sleep routines, self-care routines, because that unfortunately might not change in terms of that relationship with my family.
So a support group or seeing a therapist can help, or a
Oh, yeah.
family therapist can even help.
That's a
And
great
that can
idea.
take some of the stress out of
Yes.
those relationships and hopefully get to a positive ending. Abby, you want to talk to us a little about communication with doctors and that kind of reassurance, along with helping others know what the brain disease does?
Yeah, yeah. We're, in a place where I think the world is understanding a little bit more, just because I think everyone has been touched by dementia at some level, to be able to understand and empathize a little bit more, not to blame the person or the relationship, but that this is out of their control. So, I think many of us, definitely in my caregiver groups, comes up a lot of, what do I say? What do I educate? The one thing I would say is, generally, I know your example, Linda, wasn't as much for the community, but sometimes it's the hardest to communicate with loved ones who are more in that ambiguous loss, or just, I don't want to believe it place, thinking that they're, like, oh, dad or my wife or partner can't, this can't be happening. So I actually kind of experience almost that your own family sometimes is the most, I don't want to say resistant, but reluctant to understand or take in some of that information. With communicating with doctors, I say it's okay to be the squeaky wheel, meaning speak up. If you're not sure, you have questions, write messages. I mean, maybe not 5 a day. You know that, at some point, there's a cap, but I think in a lot of caregiver work, there's this, well, should I, could I, which leads to more of that uncertainty. Potentially writing, when we think what is solvable, what is not, you could ask the question, at least that will get you closer to maybe an answer in situations that might give you an answer. So, but I think, just like with some of the slides, that it is just common that our mind is going to question and wonder. And if reaching out to doctors and filling in the blanks, because some of this stuff is really complicated. The reports you get, the notes you read, understanding research trials, understanding these new, agents that are out there, we deserve some more certainty if we can get it. And unfortunately, the world also doesn't set us up to get all the answers. So go ahead, Judy.
Oh, no, finish. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. So assertiveness, I think sometimes asking questions is your right, and getting clarification is your right. And so if we don't need the uncertainty there, maybe there's ways to solve it.
Absolutely. The other thing that I wanted to share with everyone, the Dementia Care Collaborative has produced these identification cards, and they actually say, I am a caregiver of a person with dementia. And it has a little explanation, and then your name, and then for the person with dementia to hand to someone at a restaurant, or even a friend, or the airport, or wherever. It says, I am a person living with dementia. Please be patient. If I ask a question again. So if you want those, just again, feel free to email us. We're happy to send them out to people. They're actually translated into, I think it's 8 languages now. So that's a potential also of a way to help for people to understand what you are both going through.
Well, at least what I hear as a big theme is, you really wanted to prioritize your partner's safety and him to be respected. And, it's tough to do, especially when somebody can't articulate their own needs in the moment. And of course, their behaviors are a bit out of character, right? I'm sure he wasn't always acting that way. So for us to not say, this is a personal thing, that he's an agitated human, like that, it's sort of like you wouldn't you wouldn't go to a party and be like, hey, my name is blah 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 and I suffer from delusions. We don't lead with that. But being able to have those who would need to know in dealing with these tricky these tricky problems, for them to have the information they need to increase the likelihood they treat him with respect and dignity. And at the end of the day, we all deserve that.
And so it's an important thing to go to the police station in your local community and fill out the form, so that if you have to call 911 and they come to your house, they know that the person who you're caring for actually has dementia, and they'll know his name or her name, etc. So thank you so much for that suggestion, Karen. People are saying, thank you, Dr. Altman. We're getting to the very end of this wonderful discussion. And this has been so great to hear the suggestions on living with uncertainty and some self-care and activities and strategies for all of us, and especially for caregivers. Abby, is there more that you'd like to just close with as we get to the top of the hour?
I think nothing specific. I appreciate everyone's time, whether you officially, oh, sorry, someone come. Whether you
please mute yourself. Thank you. Go ahead.
to unmute myself, but whether you officially contributed on the chat or verbally, clearly being here, being present, helped me in the presentation of seeing all your faces. I appreciate your time, your thoughts, the way you've gived, and the way you support your loved ones. Hope that this program, as well as other programs, continue to support you in your role and in your learning.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you, Dr. Altman. Your voice alone has been a stress reliever, and you smile with your eyes. Thank you for this helpful program. People are really appreciating the information and also your warmth and knowledge and professionalism. So I have to say thank you for all of us. This has been an excellent program. Let me also share with you that in December, on December 14th, we're going to have a caregiver panel, and we'd love you all to join us for that. We also, again, if you're interested in the exercise programs, please let us know. The other thing is that the Dementia Care Collaborative has been working with the photographer, Joe Wallace, and we have just put up beautiful pictures of his photographs of people living with dementia in the main hallway as you enter Mass General Hospital, and their stories are right next to it. And we are celebrating them and honoring them for November, which is National Alzheimer's Month. So if you are in the hospital, or if you want to just see a beautiful exhibit, please join us and take some time to see these 9 people's stories and lives of who they are and what there is more about their life journey and their dementia journey. So,
yes, November
November is also Caregivers Month.
One question, our caregiver groups, not one specifically for early onset, but those with early onset, their caregivers do attend. Not in every group do we have a majority, but there's definitely a minority. So feel free to reach out, and hopefully we could offer support.
And I will be sending out an evaluation, and it really helps us for you all to answer the evaluation and say what was helpful and what could have been changed a little bit, and also give us other topics for 2024. We're just lining up speakers for health and resiliency and for our conversations with caregivers, and we would love your thoughts on what topics. So thank you, Dr. Altman. This was excellent. And as you can see, in the chat, people continue to say that it was an enlightening presentation. Thank you so much. We also at Mass General, with the Dementia Care Collaborative, run support groups and fundamental skills and other classes that complement what they do and what we all do at the Brigham and other hospitals. So we're happy we work together, and we would be delighted to refer each of you to whichever program is appropriate and the time, etc. So thank you everyone for attending. Have a good evening, and we'll see you again at the beginning of December. Thank you. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody. Take care. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.